Hello, lovelies. I'd like to thank all of you for helping Auntie hit the 200 subscriber mark recently. I'm truly humbled and thrilled. I have a special guest to help me celebrate that milestone. Please welcome the Evil Orphan, a talent so scary that the horrors in my forest made way for him, I'm told. You have to respect that. Links are in the description and at the end of the video. Go subscribe and show him that creepy love. For now, relax. And don't panic when someone asks you the innocent question, "Do you have any kids?" By Cakes at Noon. This was probably the scariest moment I had with someone at any job I've ever had. I still sometimes have nightmares about this, and to this day, I still live in the same area. 4 years ago, when I was 19, I was working for a non-profit blood donation office in the downtown area of the city I lived in. Regular blood donations, otherwise called whole blood. Being in the middle between the hospital district and the poorest part of the city, we got a lot of unique characters coming into our office. We didn't pay people for donating, so a lot of homeless people would come and we would give them snacks and water and a place to cool off. We never had any trouble with any of them. On the other side of the spectrum, we had doctors, surgeons, and retired businessmen who would come in often. They ranged from being perpetually tired to very stuck up. In this particular incident, we had a donor come in who looked like he had just finished a couple rounds of golf. He was in his 40s, dark hair with light eyes and lightly tanned skin. He was well dressed in sporty attire and had a calm and kind disposition. After he checked in, we moved to the private screening rooms. They were small, quiet rooms, half the size of a room in a doctor's office, with a computer and 2 chairs. Everything seemed normal. He was in to donate platelets for the first time in several years. I asked for his name. He gives me a smirk and tells me he won't give me his until I give him mine. I tell him my name, Ella, and he tells me his.
David,
he answered. A lot of donors, especially men, would be silly or a little flirty during their screenings, especially the really old men, so I'm not entirely frazzled just yet. While we fill out the rest of his information, he continues questioning me before giving me the answers I need to finish screening. When I asked him his address, David leaned closer to me, his eyes drilling into mine.
"Where do you live?"
he replied, not breaking eye contact with me. I tell him I live an hour away from this center, which was the truth, up north in a suburb. Obviously, I wasn't going to give him my address, and at this point, I was starting to get uncomfortable by the way he was looking at me. Perhaps it was the consistent, unblinking eye contact, or maybe it was because I couldn't read any of his emotions. He spells out his address, catching me by surprise. He lived about 10 minutes away from me.
"Where do you live, Ella?"
David asked again, his voice a little lower this time. Without looking at him, I tried to brush it off. "Up north, in a suburb," I repeat, trying to make him see that I was not interested in pursuing this conversation anymore. We moved on to his age. Again, he asks me what my age is before he would give me his. I told him 24, which was an outright lie. I did this purposely because a lot of donors wouldn't want me to be their phlebotomist, knowing I was only 19. If I didn't meet my required number of donors, my job was at risk. People assumed I was more qualified if I told them my age was 24, and my supervisor was the one who advised me to lie about my age. My age doesn't matter in the long run. I know it was lying and it was unprofessional, but I had to keep my job. I try to sound as disinterested in our conversation as possible, wanting to beg him for silence. By this point, he was quite jittery. He wrung his hands together, crossing his legs uncomfortably tight, with light sweat on his brow. I still couldn't tell if he was just trying to make small talk or if somehow I made him nervous. As I'm taking his blood pressure, he asks me a different question.
Do you ever go walking in Elm Park?
He asked, again staring at me, with a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. At this point, my heart began to race a little. I did walk that park trail a lot, usually with friends. The park is large, the walking trail about 5 miles long, and a good chunk of it runs alongside fences leading into other people's backyards. The houses were a bit run down, but large with a fair distance between them. Half the trail is also through a wooded area, sandwiching the trail between backyards and woods. My instincts tell me to lie, but I tell David instead that I know of the trail and I used to walk it as a teenager. He gives a small before tapping his foot impatiently.
It's a lovely trail. My house backs up right beside it, across from the northern woods. You might have seen it before. It's the one with the chain fence. I like to sit outside on the porch. Perhaps I've waved at you before.
He squirms in his chair now.
You know, lots of people avoid going through the wooded areas. Now why would they do that?
I don't know if I'm supposed to answer, but I'm desperately trying to get through the initial screening. Maybe it's too far of a walk for some people, I say. I ask him a medical question then. Ignoring my question, he scoots his chair closer to me.
Maybe people don't like how secluded it is. It gets dark around nighttime.
His voice is deadpan. I can almost feel the warmth radiating off his skin because he's so close. I half agreed with him, explaining that I need to get the questions finished so he can do his private medical test. Screenings usually have a 60-question test that donors take by themselves that ask them about their personal medical history. Although he didn't move away from me, he willingly answered the questions, his interrogation ceasing for now. My heart was in my ears as I pulled up the personal test page. I ran through my trained spiel about how to take the quiz quickly, wanting to get out as soon as possible to tell my supervisor about how strange our donor is acting. Please use the keyboard and mouse. We don't have a touch screen, I explained at the end. Before I could stand up, David had his hand over mine, engulfing my small digits and the mouse in his hot, sweaty palms.
This mouse?
He asked slowly with a purr in his voice, his eyes locked on my face. Quickly, I slid my hand out from under his, going to the door. I'll be outside. Please call me when you're finished, I mumbled, not looking him in the eyes. I just about slammed the door behind me before beelining straight to my supervisor's office. I told him everything that happened, how uncomfortable David seemed, how he wouldn't stop asking me personal questions, and touched my hand in a weird way. I know, it seems like I was overreacting, but the vibes he gave me made me so uncomfortable, and I have a panic disorder. He told me he would have me go to his office while he's donating to take an important call, and he would have someone else proceed with the donation. I was very relieved he believed me and had my back. By the time I came out of his office, David was leaning against the frame of the door to the screening room, his eyes following me. I still couldn't place an emotion, and he remained unblinking. I apologized for the holdup, and I shuddered, knowing we were alone once again. We took our seats, and I began typing as fast as I can. All that's left is for me to review the questions he missed or answered incompletely. A pit formed in my stomach when I saw that he skipped every single question, not answering a single one, meaning I have to ask him every single personal question and manually type every answer. "Were you confused on how to take the quiz?" I asked, very annoyed at this point.
I wanted to spend more time with you, Ella.
David said, more calm now. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead.
By the way, I never asked earlier. Do you have any kids?
My mind turned to mush, leaving me baffled by the question. I didn't have any kids, but what if I told him I did? Would that turn him off? Would knowing that I had a partner turn him away? Although I wasn't in a relationship, I told him I had one child, a daughter, and that we lived with my long-term boyfriend, whom I was high school sweethearts with. I exaggerated the words long-term. I know now this was stupid. I was lying to this stranger, and it was snowballing into a bit of a mess. Your mind does stupid things when it's panicking. David then began asking me questions about my fake daughter, how old she was, what she looked like, and if she was a good little girl. Ugh. I dodged his questions, saying that I didn't talk about my daughter at work and that I've already said enough.
I've always wanted a daughter.
He mused, his eyes looking past me and at the blank wall behind me.
A little girl, blonde hair, blue eyes, just like her sexy mother.
His eyes wandered to my blonde locks before traveling up to my blue eyes. I just watched with a panicked expression. I didn't know what to do or say.
You should come over sometime,
he continued.
I'm sure you don't live very far since we both live up north. I have some old dolls your daughter might like.
He licked his lips.
Are you sure you're truly happy? Boys your age don't know how to treat a woman right.
There was a bit of scorn in his voice for my non-existent boyfriend, and I caught him clenching his fist. I was silent. Miraculously, after ignoring him and continually asking questions, he started to answer. I gave him the cold shoulder as I finished his paperwork, making every effort to not give him the opportunity to touch me again. As we stood up to leave the room, he blocked the door, stepping as close to me as he could without being on top of me. He towered over me, and I was nearly sitting on the computer desk behind me. One of his hands came up to the side of my face, brushing his fingers lightly, running from my temple all the way down to my chin. They continued lower, his other hand rising to meet that one. He wrapped them tightly around my neck for what felt like an eternity. I grabbed his wrists, squeezing as tightly as I could, my nails digging into his skin. After about 15 to 20 seconds, he released me and I coughed, my hands going up to my neck as a shield in case he decided to do it again. Tears began to form in my eyes and I was trembling. He just watched me, unmoving.
Ella,
He murmured.
don't walk the Elm Park trails. It's not safe.
His lips were pursed, and his voice was threatening. I felt frozen. I didn't know if I should scream, kick him, or turn into a weeping pile on the floor. All I knew was that I needed to get out of the room. I shuffled around him, swiftly escorting him to my co-worker's chair, where he could donate. I didn't want to alarm the other donors. My co-worker was already told about what was happening, and I went straight to my supervisor's office. It took a while to come down from my anxiety attack, and my supervisor instructed me on how to fill out a report to corporate on David. I stayed there for 1 hour, since donating platelets took about that long. Then David was gone, and my supervisor had a team meeting the next day to explain that I was not to screen David or interact with him. There was only a faint bruise on my neck, and it was only sore for a few hours afterwards. There was really nothing I could show my corporate managers or the police if I wanted to press charges. The company wasn't going to ban someone without evidence that I was threatened or treated poorly by a donor, which was understandable. We also couldn't ask him to go to a different location. From there on out, David came in every 2 to 3 weeks to donate platelets, always asking other staff members if I could screen him or if I was working that day. Each time my coworkers would tell me how irate he would be when they told him I wasn't working or if I was at lunch. Eventually, he stopped coming altogether. I quit a few months later. My panic disorder was out of control, and I wanted to go back to school. I never walked Elm Park ever again, and still haven't to this day. Some days, I still worry that I'll bump into him at the grocery store or at the bank, but it still hasn't happened. I would be happy never seeing him again.